So it's been almost 3 years now since Joker was released. And it was a pretty memorable film and one towards which my own feelings have evolved quite a bit. When I first saw the movie, I loved it. I thought it was nothing less than a masterpiece, and I still do in a technical sense at least. However, as time has gone by, my assessment of the film has changed to the point where I don't view it quite as much as the perfect specimen as I once did. And so, what I would like to do here is provide a critique, if I may, of the film as I see it now. I will say up front that whatever criticisms I level against Joker will be restricted to its narrative elements and not the technical aspects of it, because those are largely untouchable. The cinematography is excellent, the score is magnificent, and the central performance delivered by Joaquin Phoenix is one of the finest in recent memory, if not ever. So, again, I will only be critiquing its story. So, let's take a look at Todd Phillips's Joker. If you haven't seen Joker and you don't want it spoiled, then I would suggest leaving now. You have been warned. Anyway, let us refresh ourselves in regards to the story of the film. Joker tells the story of Arthur Fleck, portrayed by Joaquin Phoenix, a mentally ill and disaffected man who works as a clown, living in relatively poor conditions in an economically depressed early 1980s Gotham City. After killing three affluent young men in self-defense and failing miserably as a stand-up comedian, Arthur slowly grows more unhinged until eventually committing an act which sees him become viewed as an impromptu champion of the underclass of Gotham and supposedly the classic comic book villain we all know. So, to begin, a criticism which I've seen leveled at the film, and one which I have gradually come to see more and more merit to, is that Joker isn't so much drama as it is melodrama. Now, melodrama is defined as a sensational dramatic piece with exaggerated characters and events intended to appeal to the emotions. The key word here being exaggerated. In short, Arthur's character in Joker is perhaps a bit much. He's mentally ill, he's poor, his social services get cut off. Literally, almost every human being he interacts with treats him like shit. He gets beaten up, he fails at his dream, his mother allowed him to suffer severe abuse, his girlfriend is imaginary. You get the picture. It would seem the entire universe conspires to shit on this one guy, but it's a testament to how well the movie portrays all this that you don't really see it that way when you're watching it. Now, I would like to compare Joker to the film which is its principal inspiration, Martin Scorsese's 1976 masterpiece and far superior film, Taxi Driver. Now, you may say, but why compare the two films? Well, because Joker rips so heavily on Taxi Driver that it's essentially an homage. Joker's two predominant influences are both Scorsese films, Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, although the latter's influence really only comes into play towards the end. Suffice it to say, though, Taxi Driver is the main inspiration here. Now, it's important to note that the characters of Arthur Fleck and Travis Bickle differ greatly. Arthur appears to be quite possibly the unluckiest person in the history of humanity, with few positive qualities, but Travis is different. In Taxi Driver, in a decidedly Chad move, Travis wins a date with Betsy, the woman with whom he is smitten, by ponying up and asking her out, right in front of another man who is also interested in her. He may be a disturbed loner, suffocating under the grime of city living, but he's not a completely hopeless loser. He also demonstrates a great degree of ingenuity in how he constructs the gun apparatuses from various articles. Basically, he has aspects to him that make him a more rounded character than just the unending train of misery that is Arthur in Joker. In other words, Travis is an object of the audience's sympathy, whereas Arthur is an object of the audience's pity. Speaking of the character of Travis Bickle, though, that leads me into my second criticism. Never have I seen a film whose protagonist is so passive in their own story as Arthur is in Joker. The story of Taxi Driver is driven, pun intended, almost entirely by the actions of its protagonist, Travis Bickle. Arthur Fleck drives almost none of the action in Joker. He doesn't make the story happen so much as the story just happens to him. Honestly, it's kind of dangerously close to contrivance. The story places him in a series of scenarios which he reacts to, but rarely does he ever demonstrate any proactive action. The story is honestly somewhat coincidental, meaning that Arthur is largely just along for the ride rather than powering the ride himself. The only proactive decision, really, that he makes in the film is to kill the talk show host, Murray Franklin, and that only comes at the end. Generally, you kind of want to see the protagonist have at least a fair measure of agency in their own story, or at least I think so. Now, my next criticism may push some buttons, and I don't mean to at all, but I think it needs to be said. Joker is not the greatest portrayal of mental illness, despite that being its loudest motif. Mental illness is a tricky thing to portray in a story, especially if it's in a character that we're supposed to side with and root for. And that's because mental illness is so often so ugly. Mental illness is not a pretty thing, and it often, sadly, has the effect of making those suffering from such conditions difficult and difficult to relate to as well. And that is not at all to say that such people are undeserving of sympathy and aid, but anyone who's ever dealt with a person afflicted with severe mental illness can probably attest that it's often quite hellish. But this is where Joker becomes a tad cowardly. It wants to be some grand commentary on the plight of the mentally ill, yet it won't go all in with it. It's important to note that we're never even told exactly what condition or conditions Arthur has. He obviously has something akin to pseudobulbar affect, and he appears to have some form of depression, but beyond that, we don't know. And neither of those conditions would really be enough to excuse the things he ultimately does in the movie, which does, in fact, appear to be what happens in the end. The movie doesn't want to give us a guy who talks to shadow people and smears the walls with his own feces because it knows the audience would have trouble relating to someone like that. So instead, it bandies the words mental illness about a lot, but ultimately endows its main character with rather mild examples of it. Now, the next issue I have with the movie concerns its morality, or rather the fact that the character of Joker is portrayed as moral at all. This contradicts how the character is normally portrayed in the comics, as well as contradicts certain elements of the film itself. You see, Joker wants to have it both ways. It wants to have its cake and eat it too. The film must consciously recognize that Joker is a villain, yet it never wants to portray him as such. As a result, Joker is still a highly moral character in the film. Now, wait, you may say, he kills people in the movie. How can that be moral? Well, it's because Joker, the film, walks a very fine line between condemning and condoning. While it's true that Arthur kills people in the movie, he only ever commits killings of which the audience can at least tenuously approve. No one gave a rat's ass when Randall got stabbed in the eye. It was what everyone wanted to see happen, even if they wouldn't admit such a thing out loud. The same goes for his mother. You let a little kid get brutalized, kill that bitch. We don't care. Same for Murray. He insensitively made fun of a mentally ill guy whose life is unremitting crap, ergo, he gets what he effing deserves. Now, contrast this once again with Taxi Driver. In that film, the main character, Travis Bickle, attempts to assassinate an up and coming politician because he's nuts. And that serves to complicate our perception of the character because now we see him engaging in acts which cannot be condoned under any system of ethics. Joker, on the other hand, doesn't do this. The movie actually goes to fairly painstaking lengths to ensure that its main character is always in at least a somewhat flattering light. And it's because of this that the film is ultimately a bit gutless. And this is why Taxi Driver is the better film. Both Taxi Driver and Joker make artistic statements about the contemporary times in which they were produced. One does so subtly and ambiguously, leaving it up to each individual viewer to ultimately decide where they stand on the events depicted. The other does so in a fairly didactic and frankly quite preachy manner, which tries its damnedest to make the audience have only one conclusion to reach. And maybe that's the problem with these villain films like Maleficent and Joker and Cruella. Now, I could go on a long spiel about the postmodern inversion of conventional morality, which posits that basically the good guys are actually the bad guys, and the bad guys are really the good guys, but that's a topic for a whole other video. It's enough to say, though, that this is the premise upon which Joker is built, but that problem is that in order to craft a film built around a character who is commonly perceived to be evil, you have to do so very carefully. And how do you do that? Well, you make it so that it's not them that's evil, but rather everyone else. So, as a result, in the film, Arthur still obeys some form of morality. Notable is the fact that Arthur doesn't harm the dwarf guy who was the one person that was nice to him because he still operates under the guidance of a moral framework, which is in direct opposition to the way the character of the Joker is portrayed in the comics typically. For example, see this instance from the Injustice comic. Why? Why? You need a reason? It's probably the same reason I beat that puppy to death with a kitten last week. When the howling and meowing stops and all you're left with is a mess of fur and blood and brains, well, you can't beat that warm, glowing feeling inside. Just as an aside, I want to say that I think this constitutes one of the finest instances of Joker writing in the comics because it really captures the essence of the character quite well and quite succinctly because the extravagance and grandiosity of the depravity reaches levels so over the top that it becomes somewhat comical. Yet underlying that comedy is an element of horror and brutality. And I really do think that just, captures the essence of the character very well, actually. The Joker of the comics is not a nice guy. I mean, he beats puppies to death with kittens. Sure, we kind of harbor a kernel of twisted affinity for the dude because it's hard not to admire somebody who just simply refuses to give any kind of a shit about anything. But we're still all too happy to see Batman kick the hell out of him because we know that no matter how charming and cool he may seem, he's still evil, at least by the standards of ordinary morality. But it's the very issue of morality that undercuts the character of the Joker in the film. In the comics, or at least in the modern ones, the Joker is usually portrayed as amoral, not immoral. Immorality means you understand the distinction between right and wrong and you simply don't care. Amorality means you either have no moral conceptions or you don't recognize any. And that's the Joker in the comics. He recognizes no moral code due to the nihilistic way he views reality. Morals are invented notions, fabrications, in other words. And Joker sees no value in things that are false. But of course, in the film, Arthur still obeys some warped sense of morality. The only wholly unjustified murder he commits is when he kills the therapist woman at the tail end. But then again, we don't even see what he does, so he may not even have killed her. The next problem I have with the film is that while Joker is a roundly excellent film, an incredibly well made film, it's a pretty poor Joker film, I think, because it sort of misses the heart of the character. Now, when Joker was advertised, it was advertised as something unique, a comic book film that was largely divorced from any comic book inspiration. However, that's not entirely true. While Joker shows far more influences of Martin Scorsese than any of the comics, it does still utilize certain comics, most prominently Alan Moore's and Brian Boland's The Killing Joke, but I think it doesn't make very good use of that comic, actually. You see, the whole point of the Joker character is that reality can be so horrifying and cruel that if looked at a certain way, it can turn nominally normal people into, well, the Joker. That is, after all, what happens in The Killing Joke. The Joker is just a guy who has one bad day, which forces him to reevaluate the way he views his existence, ultimately reaching the conclusion that life itself is but a joke and that the joke is at our expense. The point basically being that sanity is a fragile thing that can buckle quite easily if you look at things just right. However, that point is entirely lost in the movie because he's already mentally compromised from the start. Making the Joker be just some poor mentally ill schmuck loses some of the power of the character, I feel, because it's implicitly saying that it would require a diseased mind to become the Joker, whereas in the comics, Joker is arguably not even crazy. He just sees things from a radically different perspective than anyone else. Insanity, after all, is not a medical or psychological term, but a legal one. And perhaps insane can sometimes just mean a different perspective. So, my final criticism of the film has to do with the way it hamstrings itself and ultimately breaks down at the end. Watch the following scenes and I will explain.
Murray.
Hey, it's Mr. Franklin, buddy.
Come on, Gene. That's all bullshit.
Thank you, Murray. I feel like I know you. I've been watching you forever.
Thank you. What's with the face? I mean, are you part of the protest? Or?
No, I don't believe in any of that. I don't believe in anything.
Now, this right here may just be my favorite moment in the film because it really approaches the nihilism that the character embodies in the comic book source material. That last line, I don't believe in anything, that was a great line. And it really hit hard just because of the kind of nonchalance with which it was delivered. That was really great. But sadly, unfortunately, it had to go and hamstring itself mere moments later, as we will see.
Okay, I think I might understand that you did this to start a movement, to become a symbol.
Come on, Murray. Do I look like the kind of clown that could start a movement? I killed those guys because they were awful. Everybody is awful these days. It's enough to make anyone crazy.
Okay, so that's it. You're crazy. That's your defense for killing 3 young men?
No. They couldn't carry a tune to save their lives. Oh, why is everybody so upset about these guys? If it was me dying on the sidewalk, you'd walk right over me. I pass you every day and you don't notice me. But these guys, what, because Thomas Wayne cried about them on TV?
You have a problem with Thomas Wayne, too.
Yes, I do. Have you seen what it's like out there, Murray? Do you ever actually leave the studio? Everybody just yells and screams at each other. Nobody's civil anymore. Nobody thinks what it's like to be the other guy. You think men like Thomas Wayne ever think what it's like to be someone like me? To be somebody but themselves? They don't. They think that we'll just sit there and take it like good little boys, that we won't werewolf and go wild.
You finished? I mean, there's so much self-pity, Arthur. You sound like you're making excuses for killing those young men. Not everybody, and I'll tell you this, not everyone is awful.
You're awful,
Murray. Me? I'm awful? Oh yeah, how am I awful?
Playing my video. Inviting me on the show. You just wanted to make fun of me. You're just like the rest of them.
You don't know the first thing about me, pal. Look what happened because of what you did, what it led to. There were riots out there. 2 policemen are in critical condition. You're laughing. You're laughing. Someone was killed today because of what you did.
I know. How about another joke, Murray?
No, I think we've had enough of your jokes.
What do you get
I don't think so.
when you cross
I think
a
we're
mentally
done
ill
with your
loner
jokes.
with
That's
a
it.
society that abandons him and treats him like trash?
Call the police,
I'll
Gene.
tell you what you get.
Call the police.
You get what you fucking deserve.
Now, overall, this scene is pretty great. However, I think it's carried pretty much entirely by Joaquin Phoenix's acting and the camera work, and not so much by the script. Going back to what I just said a moment ago about how great that line was, where he said, "I don't believe in anything," well, you undercut that, because for a guy who doesn't believe in anything, you sure have some pretty strong opinions, strong enough to go on a minutes long diatribe about the ills of society and how bad everything is, when really you should probably be beyond caring. That is, after all, the one redeeming quality that the Joker has. There's nothing he can't laugh at. There is no tragedy that can't elicit at least a chuckle, not even his own. That's the heart of the character. He can laugh at his own misfortune because that's the joke. Bad shit happens to good people and nothing cares. Life goes on. All you can do is laugh at it. He's supposed to embrace the nihilism, revel in the absurd. That's why Heath Ledger's Joker will forever be the best portrayal for me, live action at least, because he truly was an agent of chaos, not a pathetic sad sack who espouses an "I don't believe in anything" viewpoint one minute, but then proceeds to complain about how terrible things are the next. You should be laughing at that. And plus, Heath Ledger's Joker could actually go toe to toe with Batman, who, it must be remembered, is pretty much the ultimate badass. If this is Batman's greatest foe, then that would be the lamest Batman ever. But the real weakness to this, the way it truly breaks down for me, has to do with that line, "What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash?" Gosh, that was on the nose. Because nobody refers to themselves as a mentally ill loner. That's what news outlets refer to people as after they've committed some heinous act. If you have the wherewithal to refer to yourself as a mentally ill loner, you're not going to end up in the asylum like you do at the end of the movie. You're going to go to prison, because that demonstrates a sufficient level of self awareness that you're going to have a hard time using your nebulous mental illness as an excuse for what you did, which is apparently what happens, since he ends up in Arkham Asylum at the end of the film and not Blackgate Penitentiary. That was really heavy-handed to me. The script got really blatant at that point, and it completely hamstrung his earlier statement. Personally, I think it would have been better if he had just gone out there and plopped down and told some bad jokes and then shot the guy in the head. But that's just me. But of course, with what this film was trying to say, he had to speechify. And it's kind of at odds with itself. This is what I meant earlier when I said the movie tries to have it both ways. He's crazy, but yet he's sound enough to recognize that fact. You see what I mean? So that has been my critique of Joker. I know there's probably a lot that people might disagree with, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of this has been largely subjective, just my personal contentions that I have come to realize with the film. But I do think there are some objective, weaknesses to it, if not all out flaws. But again, this is just my take on it. I still love this film. It is, I mean, since there is such a glut of films based on comics nowadays, I would really, really love to see more like this, and not so much of that just endless stream of Marvel crap that they keep putting out. I would really like to see more gritty experimental work such as this, even though it does just kind of rip on some older films. It does it quite well, mostly. But yeah, that has been my critique of Joker. If you have enjoyed anything you have seen or heard here today, remember to like, subscribe, help the channel out a little bit. And remember, that's life.